Alrighty guys, so this is going to be on shading your shapes. So you're going to be using colored pencils to shade your shapes, and you're going to be using complementary colors to create natural shadows. So complementary colors, those are colors that are opposite of the color wheel. Red and green, blue and orange, purple and yellow. And if you look in the middle, they all kind of form this kind of muted, darker, not really one color, nor really the other color. Right? They neutralize one another. It's a little more obvious with painting, but with colored pencil, it can work just as well. Now, the thing with this is that with colored pencil, we have to think about layering. We don't just want to color straight up with all of the pressure that we have on our body, right? We want to lightly layer these colors and not just like one layer, but two or three, even possibly more, and not just using the one color. Like here, it's orange, right? Uh, you're going to be using multiple colors to work with this, right? So here, you kind of see the development of this colored pencil drawing. Ours are not going to be this detailed or necessarily this vibrant. Ours could probably be somewhere right around here because this is still a pretty nice intense color. Uh, so with colored pencils, you have to do layers. And I also want to talk about like where colors are going to go. So we have to think about our light sources, right? This little note here, it says, showing white, a warm color, the color itself, a cool color. Really ignore that. I'm going to show you guys how to really work with these for this project. But this is a viable option. It's just a little bit more complex. So you're going to layer your base colors and your complements together. We've drawn our shapes. We've gone over it with Sharpie, right? We have to decide on a light source and keep our light source consistent. Remember that the shadow is the most intense on the opposite side of the light source. So these, we see the highlight is the most intense right there. The shadow is going to be opposite of that. Highlight is most intense up top. Shadow is going to be most intense below that. Okay, so there is a little wiggle room with these, but this is the general rule. Opposite side of your light source, that side of the shape is the darkest, or anything that's facing away from your light source is going to be dark. Flat surfaces are going to be one single value, so even though they are fairly, there's a little bit of change here and there, overall they're pretty consistent with being one value. This one's pretty dark gray, medium gray, overall one of the lighter grays. Okay, same thing like with the cylinder here. Overall, the top, that flat part is pretty consistent. Curved surfaces have that gradation, right? They fade from light to dark or from dark to light, depending on how you're shading and where your light source is. Just so you know, each column in this image, each one has the same light source. So all of these shapes, they have the same light source. All of these shapes being lit from the same spot, same thing all the way across. And so that's something you want to keep consistent. And then we're going to build up the color, which is what I'm going to show you now. So I've got some shapes here, some geometric forms, and I'm going to go ahead and say that they're all going to be lit from the top right. Right? So all of them would have a light source like that. And let's say I'm going to go and shade these blue. I have several blues here, a lighter one and a darker one. And if I remember back from the color wheel, the opposite of blue is orange. So I'm going to need this orange, right? So I've got multiple blues and orange. I might even bring in a little bit of red here because that's kind of close to the orange family. But I'm going to start with my lightest color because just with colored pencils, we can't erase this, right? We can add more color, but we can't necessarily make it lighter. And I've seen instances where colored pencils are erasing. Some of them you can erase. I know they make erasable ones, but even these that are not technically erasable, I've seen in certain instances they can be erased, but it's not something I would prefer to chance. So I would say don't do that. So I've got a pretty nice layer here. I'm going to shade a little bit kind of like I would in monochrome, right? So if I were just doing this with one color alone, just this one pencil, pressing harder for the darker areas, and then easing up on the pressure for the lighter areas. I'm going to do a little bit of that. I don't want to go this intense though, right? I just want to darken it just a little bit all over. I'm going to focus here on the cylinder real quick. So now I'm going to take this darker blue and I'm going to start focusing on the most intense parts. So if I can see that my light source is over here, right? If we're thinking in perspective, darkest area is going to go somewhere right here, somewhere right in there. So that's going to be the big focus. Now I'm still not going super dark with this, right? I'm still going fairly light with it overall. Okay. So we've got a little bit of depth. We've got a little bit of shading going on, a little bit of form starting to take place. But now I'm going to take in the orange. And I'm going to focus it in that shaded area, focusing it more so in that most intense part of the shadow. You can see what starts to happen is that the orange begins to kind of neutralize that blue. It starts taking out the color almost. Because if we think about it, when something is in shadow, there's no light to it. It's not getting any light. And you guys know that color only exists because we have light, right? Color exists because of reflected light. So if we have less reflected light, we will also have less color. And so now I'm starting to build up with all of those colors together. Again, still focusing them in on their respective areas. So like the core shadow here, receiving a little bit more pressure than the lighter areas out here. I'm just kind of fading it out. Okay. And so I can continue this process of layering, a little bit of this color, a little bit of that color. I can do that until I get a super solid color. What I have right now, that'll work. That'll work absolutely fine. So I'm going to move on to my sphere. Going a little bit more intense with this blue here. And still letting it be light up here because that's the area closest to my light source. Into that darker area. When you're working with colored pencils, just like when we work with regular pencil, keep your lead sharp. So have that sharpener on you. Again, in these core shadow areas. You're really not using that much of the complement, right? You're just using it to kind of deaden the color and make your shading look fairly natural. So we don't have to aim for this, those core shadows to be something like pure black or like a really dark gray or something. No. I'm going back, layering a little bit more, kind of sandwiching that complementary color in there. And if you can see little bits of the color itself, like in some of the cylinder here, I can see some stripes of orange. In the sphere, I can see some stripes of orange as well. That's okay, right? This isn't going to blend absolutely perfectly. And that's actually kind of nice because it allows the viewer to be a little bit more involved, right? We call this optical color mixing, kind of what the Impressionists were doing, or those that did pointillism were doing. Okay. And if you notice that your color, the color of the form looks a little bit off, like I feel like my shadow looks a little bit orange, go back over it with the complement, neutralize it. There we go. Right. So this is how we use colored pencils.